Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm your host, Rollin Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome Carlin Atkinson to the show. Carlin is my brother-in-law, who's married to my sister, Kayleen. Since getting to know him, I've enjoyed hearing him talk about his latest tech recommendations, how to improve my computer's performance, and his many unique interests. But what I really appreciate about him is the wisdom that he has when he talks about how to use technology. And in conversation, but also on this podcast episode, he offers some really solid advice on how to think about technology and how to use it well. From robotics to his job in IT at Faith Builders to the proper use of technology, I really learned a lot from this conversation. I hope that you too will enjoy it and learn from his expertise. Welcome, Carlin, to the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you this evening.
Thank you, Rollin. It's an honor to be on your show.
All right. So tell me a little bit. What is your work like, or what keeps you busy currently?
I'm an IT administrator for Faith Builders Christian School. What keeps me busy? It really depends on the day and the time of year. Faith Builder does a variety of different things, different terms. Right now it is winter term, which is a 5-week term. And typically it's more structured kind of like a Bible school would be. Different classes more focused on the Bible, and some about teaching, and so forth. And short terms tend to keep me hopping a little bit more than a normal fall or spring semester, typically because we have anywhere from 70 to 80 new students, and so they often have a lot of questions and problems that crop up, and so I get to put out a lot of fires
Right, yeah.
on short terms. So that definitely keeps me busy at work. The other thing that keeps me busy currently, and this is a new thing this year, is I am teaching a robotics class down in FBCS, which is the day school part of Faith Builders. That keeps me hopping
Nice.
to get involved with teaching, robotics, small electronics, that kind of thing.
Okay,
But I really enjoy that.
nice.
And
How
so those,
I was just gonna ask, how many days a week are you doing that, or how frequently are those classes?
it's twice a week,
Okay.
and the class period is 30 minutes, which is not even close to enough time. So I have to talk really fast and yeah, help them with their projects and stuff. So I also assign them a lot of homework as well,
Okay,
and that helps with the class time being so short.
nice. Is that an elective, or are all the students taking that class, or what age group is it that you're teaching?
It is an elective, and it's optional and extra work for the students. It
Okay.
is high school,
Okay.
and so I have 6 guys in my class this year.
Okay. Are you
So
do you do hands-on things too, or is it all theory and classwork, or what? How is the class kind of set up?
it kind of combines some of both. I tend to weight it more on the side of doing projects, so it's hands-on learning. It's a little bit easier to learn the concepts doing it with hands-on, which is one reason why I'm a big fan of robotics. And I think
Okay.
this is a personal opinion of mine, but every school should have a robotics class. It's a great way to learn engineering skills,
Mm-hmm.
practical thinking, and logical thinking, programming,
Mm-hmm.
mathematics. It kind of pulls all those pieces together. And what's so cool about it is with a robot, let's say that you have a robot and the wheels are 2 inches in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that you need to move the robot exactly 1 foot. So you
Right.
can give that problem to your students and have them figure it out. Well, so if you know the diameter of your wheel, you can figure out how many revolutions you have to turn the wheel to move the robot exactly 1 foot.
Right. Yeah.
But then you can make the problem even harder. Well, what happens if the robot loses traction, right? And the wheel spins? How do you know if the robot, if the wheels, spun, you lost traction, and your revolution count is accurate, but the robot didn't move 1 foot?
Yeah.
How do you solve that? Or if you want to turn, or avoid obstacles, or follow a line, or solve a maze, or something like that, it creates these really fun problems, and you can come up with a theory of how to solve the problem, code it, you upload your code to the robot, and then you get to watch it in the real world interact with the real world and see if it actually works.
Yeah.
So there's that instant feedback part of it where you're not just, it's not all just theory and memorization. It's this experimenting and that instant feedback, which is a ton of fun in the classroom. And it
Yeah.
really gets kids involved, especially in the areas of mathematics and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that does sound great. It's something that I've never done anything with. But yeah, just the way you describe it there, and thinking from a teacher's perspective, that's a way to bring so many different aspects together. Do you have a few robots that you can use in the class, or or what are you using in order to do those projects?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to the class. The first part is we are using what's called an Arduino, which is basically a very small computer or microcontroller.
Okay.
And the idea with that is we're going to spend the first half of the class, about half a year, focused on learning how to program, how to read sensors, how to, control motors, those kinds of things.
Okay.
And then we'll take that knowledge and we'll plug it into a robot on the second half of the class.
Okay.
And for the robots, what I did is I bought two kits. Robots tend to be kind of expensive. So I bought two little kits, and they're based on the Arduino microcontroller.
Okay.
And that's helpful because they can use the exact knowledge they learned with the Arduino, plug it into the robot, and it's the same code, same programming interface,
Okay.
all of that. And the robots I chose are called the Pololu Zumo.
Okay.
And what's really, really cool about that particular robot is that it can do a whole array of different things. It can follow lines, it can solve mazes, it can do obstacle avoidance, it can do sumo wrestling, which is a lot of fun. It can balance on like two wheels essentially, or tracks. It's a tracked robot,
Okay.
kind of like a Segway would.
Uh-huh.
And so you have just about any sensor you can imagine on the robot. And it's just a lot of fun for the students to play with and learn how to interact and use all of those different sensors. Whereas
Oh
some
yeah.
robots in the classroom are really focused, they only do one thing.
Okay.
Um, and I really want to challenge them to be creative with their programming skills and utilize some of the different sensors on the robot. Um, so at the end of the class, what we're going to do is have a little sumo robot competition. And the idea there is most people are familiar with sumo wrestling. It sounds crazy, but in robotics, it's a lot of fun. And basically, you have a small wooden ring,
Okay.
and then you have two robots. They might have wheels or tracks, and they have basically their mini dozer blades on the front,
Okay.
and they're all autonomous. And the idea is that you set your robots in the ring. There's a 5-second countdown, and then the robots have to try to find the other robot in the ring and push it off.
Okay.
And so whoever can push the other robot off wins the round. So it's
Gotcha.
best out of three.
Nice. So are they like, do you have to program all of the autonomy and things like that so that they know to do the right maneuvers, or how do you set it up ahead of time? Is that the
Correct.
is it like
Yeah.
whoever programs it the best is going to be successful, or is there some luck involved in a little competition like that?
Yeah. If you have identical robots, then whoever outcodes the other team
Okay.
wins essentially.
Okay.
But not always, because what I found in my experience with sumo robot competitions is the people who stick to the simpler code tend to win.
Oh,
And I don't know if it's because there's less to go wrong or there's less code for the robot to process, so it's a little bit faster with responding to, unforeseen things. Um, but typically, the simple code is like search and destroy, right? Scan,
okay.
pivot left to right in search of the robot. If you see an object within a foot of distance, you just full speed ahead towards it, right? And just try to push it off. Usually that's the best
Okay.
strategy. Um, but it also comes down to mechanical advantage as well, right?
Okay.
Like you could have the smartest robot on the ring, but still lose to a robot that is really quite dumb.
Okay.
Like if you have the mechanical advantage, and one way of doing that is to have a dozer blade that is it's very slanted, so the angle is very shallow, right?
Uh-huh.
Maybe 20 or 30 degrees, and then the edge of the blade is really sharp.
Oh, okay.
And professionals, they have essentially razor blades on the front. And the idea is if you get underneath the other robot or your opponent, you effectively lift it off the ground and it has no traction anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so it's this combination of like mechanical advantage and, smarts,
Yeah.
software, your algorithm essentially to win the round.
Gotcha, yeah. Is this have you done a lot of robotics like before, like when you were younger, or how did you or where did your interest in it come from?
Yeah, I think let's see. It's been a long time. When I was a little kid, I'll get into this story a little bit
Okay,
later because
gotcha,
it
yeah.
also intersects with how I got into computers and
Okay.
IT.
Yep.
But when I was in high school, a friend of mine and I built some robots for a Penn State competition.
Oh,
We
okay.
did that 3 years in a row.
Uh-huh.
So it was a little competition. It's not very big, but it's put on by Penn State University of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the main thing was sumo wrestling, and they had elementary and high school
Oh,
competitions.
neat.
And that was a lot of fun. That really kind of sparked the interest and the love of robotics, kind
Okay.
of through those competitions and working with my friend on building them and so forth.
Okay, so yeah, so that kind of why I was asking the question is I was wondering if you've done a number of competitions and things like that. So my question with that then is your goal in those competitions to destroy the other robots, or do you feel bad if you break something on an opponent's robot?
I would feel very bad because I understand the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into building
Okay.
it. Um, so the idea with sumo is simply pushing the other
Okay.
person. So any offensive weapon, such as, a saw blade or, some kind of hammer or spinning discs and momentum and that kind of thing, that stuff you see in what's called battle bots.
Oh, okay.
And
Because I think I've seen
battle,
videos of those or something like where they're just out to
yeah.
to absolutely destroy the other robot.
I have to admit, battle bots are a lot of fun to watch. They're very entertaining. But they're not fun to get destroyed if you own the robot.
Well,
So,
yeah,
people spend thousands of dollars on these robots, and after a competition, they have to rebuild. So,
yeah.
a
I
little bit
guess they're
painful,
not
but a
cheap
lot of
to.
fun.
Yeah, they're not
Yeah.
cheap to do. Yeah. Is this
Yeah.
your first time teaching something like this, or have you had experience with that in the past?
This is the first time I am teaching something like this.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it a someone from the elementary school or the high school come to you and ask you, or did you volunteer to do this, or how did it come about?
Yeah, someone came to me and asked me if I would. It's been something that's been talked about. I think it's partly my fault because a few years ago I did a little speech on why I believe robots should be in the classroom.
Okay.
Um, and I was doing my best to be persuasive, and I think kind of through that sparked a conversation about maybe we should consider having a robotics class on a small scale or something. And so it eventually came to fruition, I guess.
Yeah, very good. Well, yeah, thanks for the little story there about your current experience and some of the past. That's fascinating, and I've heard about the benefits of a robotics program at a school, and I know a lot of the local schools here will have like a robotics club or something like that, but never really conversed with someone about some of the benefits of it. So that's fascinating to think about. Maybe
Yeah.
changing gears a little bit here and thinking back to the main part of your job. I'm going to ask the question this way. So I hear the term IT thrown around a lot. What does that actually stand for or mean? The letters IT.
Yeah. Yeah, it is confusing to a lot of people. It simply means information technology.
Okay.
And so it's a pretty broad category. Like, what is information technology? Um, I would define it quite simply as anything that is electronic in nature, laptops,
Okay.
servers, phones,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. That's information technology to me.
Yeah, I got you. I always think of that as technology, so I always wonder where the information, the I of IT comes into it. But I guess it's technology that's transferring information a lot of the time. Is that where the information part of it comes from, or how would you describe how the information part of IT?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't actually know the origins of where the information aspect of IT came from. Because like radios, for example, I don't think were referred to as IT. Like if you were a radio technician,
Oh
you
yeah.
didn't necessarily work in IT, and it wasn't until I'm thinking in the 80s, 70s, and 80s when, computers started um, being really developed as we know them now,
Mm-hmm.
um, that information technology kind of was the term used. So I don't actually know where information came from. That'd be a fun research project.
Yeah, yeah. I've often. I mean, I know what the term meant, but I wasn't sure what the information part of it is. So I guess with your specific work then, is it repairs that you're doing to technology or setting up systems or yeah, what are some of the tasks that you would do on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I kind of do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm what you would call an in-house IT admin.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't work for a computer shop or something like that. I am focused on maintaining, setting up, fixing computers on a school network.
Right?
And so that means a variety of things. And how I would define myself would be I would call myself an IT generalist,
Okay.
which basically I know a little bit about almost everything,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I might not know some of those things well at all.
Right.
Um, and it's I don't know, I think it's essential. Any kind of administrative role in IT is really helpful to know a lot about, I say a lot, to know a lot about many different things, or a little bit about many different things.
Right.
um, and then when there's something that requires a high level of skill, like programming, for example,
Mm-hmm.
custom software or something,
Right.
as the IT admin, you know what you need in that situation, but you can't implement it. And so you hire it out.
Right.
You might hire a freelancer or a friend who is more focused than what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I set up new workstations for offices.
Mm-hmm.
I maintain networks and backups,
Mm-hmm.
firewall, web filter, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Repair hardware. As a school and a nonprofit, we don't have endless supply of cash.
Yeah.
So if you can fix it, you do. If you can
Mm-hmm.
get something used, you do. You kind of hack together, different solutions and stuff to try to do it in a cheap, effective way.
Yeah. Do you is part of that then like working within a budget and figuring out how you're going to allocate your budget for a year or that kind of thing, or How are you involved in the financial side of running IT?
Yeah, so that's actually interesting because of anything that's probably one of the most difficult things about my job, I
Okay.
find personally.
Yep.
And that is like, so yeah, every year we have a certain amount of money set aside for the IT budget. Um, and you can allocate, I'm going to spend this much on software. You might have some subscriptions. You might decide you're going to upgrade to the newer version of, Microsoft Server, for example.
Hmm.
So you need so many $1,000s for that, and you allocate it out. But then if anything dies or breaks, um, suddenly your budget, falls apart. So you have to allocate kind of, enough money for emergencies.
Hmm.
And when you get towards the end of the year and nothing is broken, you're like, well, I want to use that money because it's allocated for tech.
Yeah.
We may as well improve something while we have the resources. And it's
Yeah.
it's difficult to know where and how to spend uh, the money that we have.
Yeah.
Um, and we're not a typical business where you upgrade your computer system and it improves the efficiency of your employees by 10%, let's say.
Right.
Well, over a year of time, that really saves your business a lot of money and pays for your IT infrastructure pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah, we don't quite function that way as a school, and so it's harder to justify, you know, improving a system that saves you 10% of efficiency.
Yeah.
Um, and so that definitely can be a challenge. Um, I hope I'm getting better at it. I'm not sure. um, my supervisor is involved in that process as well, and it's just really helpful to talk to him about it and come up with a plan. And
Hmm.
there's grace too. Like sometimes I go over budget a little bit, sometimes I don't. So if it kind of averages out over time, it works out okay.
Yeah. I
But
get.
I'm an advocate for increasing IT budgets. Uh,
Yeah.
so, but yeah,
Well, it's often people that are within programs, and they can see all the benefits that you'd get from just a little more capital allocated towards towards the section that I'm working in
yeah,
or something like that. Yeah.
right.
And
And IT tends to be like really expensive.
yeah.
So, like if you buy a new server, for example, it's completely reasonable to spend $50,000 on that
Wow.
server. Some people will spend hundreds of thousands,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of business or infrastructure you need. You might spend 250 grand, upgrading your system. And that's a lot of money, but I like to think about it kind of like a construction company. Like you look at a construction company and they might have, three Ford F-350 pickup trucks
Right.
and three crews. And that one pickup truck supports, maybe four guys typically, sometimes more, sometimes less.
Right.
But, a new Ford F-350 pickup, they're 50,000 or more, sometimes less, depends what you buy. Um, but that's an expensive piece of hardware, but it's required to do your work.
Right.
And in the business world or educational world or any kind of office work that requires the IT infrastructure, if you have 50 employees or 1,000 employees and you spend $50,000 on a new server that supports those 50 or 1,000 employees, well,
Hmm.
if you take that $50,000 and divide it by your number of employees, and then however many years, let's say you want to use that equipment for 5 years, suddenly cost per person per year is very, very small.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's kind of a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
And I think it's, people who have to foot the bill of upgrading the infrastructure, if they don't have a good understanding of why they should spend that money on it,
Hmm.
oftentimes they spend way too little on IT,
Huh.
and that creates a lot of problems down the road.
Yeah.
Insecure networks,
Yeah.
system
Yep.
failures, and then you spend thousands of dollars recovering from that when you could have prevented it.
Yeah.
So that's a little hobby horse of mine.
Yeah.
So I try to help people understand that it's worthwhile investing in a system that you use every day.
Hmm.
Um, so it usually ends up paying for itself. You can, of course, spend way more money than you need to. So there is a point of being wise too, but
Yeah. and we'll maybe get into this a little bit more. I'm not sure if I put them down, but I know I'm curious about some of these things that you've been talking here about. So that's great to hear. But is it one of those things where if you when you're spending the money, you maybe don't don't think about it that you haven't spent enough until something happens, and then and then you wish so much that you would have got the system, like you wouldn't have tried to get by with an inferior system or something like that. Whereas if everything goes fine, then you maybe you maybe don't realize it, that how important it is that you had a sufficient system. But when there's a problem, then you just wish that you had just spent what it took to avoid the problem that you ended up having. Is that
Yeah.
often the case?
That is, yeah, very often the case. And it's kind of like, you have a computer, you use it for 5 years, and sometimes you think about, wow, my computer's really slow. And then you use a new computer and it's really fast, and suddenly your old computer seems extremely slow.
Yeah,
Um, it's kind of that kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, very good. Maybe just a little bit more about you. Do you have any hobbies or interests outside of your work that you'd like to share with us here?
Oh my. I have too many hobbies. That is probably good for one man. Um, there's a few things that come to mind right off the bat, and so I'll just kind of go through some of them
Yeah, that's great.
quickly. Uh, Probably the first thing I think of is coffee. I really
Hmm.
enjoy coffee. Um, like I love the taste of coffee and enjoying that,
Hmm.
but I love the process of making it too. So I find that to be a really important like routine and aspect of my day. And so I'm into pour over coffees now. I used to be into French press. I still love that as well, but I keep
Okay.
trying different methods of making coffee.
What's
Um,
special about a pour over method, or what's kind of the idea behind it?
you have a lot of control over the extraction, like extracting the flavor from your coffee
Okay.
beans. You have a lot of control when you do pour over. And what's really nice about the pour over compared to a French press is that you don't have that fine like grit in the bottom of your coffee that
Okay.
you would get from a French press, because a pour over will go through like a paper filter.
Okay.
Um, so that's one reason why I really like that. It would be, you can get similar flavors from like an AeroPress, for example, than a
Okay.
pour over. And it's just a lot of fun. You can like slowly pour the water over your coffee beans.
Hmm.
That's really fun. I enjoy that. But I
So,
particularly like roasting coffee beans.
okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I roast my own coffee beans with a little coffee roaster I got for free. It's just like one of those little air popcorn makers. And you can find them at a thrift store for like $3.
So, like, it is
Um,
actually a popcorn popper, or
yeah,
it's like that.
it's called a potpourri.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's like this little appliance that sits on your counter, and it has a metal cylinder and a fan on the bottom.
Okay.
And so the idea is you take your popcorn kernels, you dump them in and turn on your potpourri, and once the popcorn pops, the air from the fan on the bottom of the cylinder blows the popcorn out into a popcorn bowl.
Oh yeah, because it's lighter
They're
than.
really,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're really cool to make popcorn and a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Um, but they work really, really well to roast coffee as well.
Okay.
So like the fan will like move the coffee beans around in the metal cylinder
Hmm.
and keep them from burning and that kind of thing.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
But
And
you can roast coffee on a frying pan actually if you want to. It's a
okay.
little more tedious because you have to constantly be shaking the pan or kind of flipping them to keep from burning the coffee beans, but it's doable.
Yeah.
So,
So what's the benefit of roasting your own beans?
well, the benefit one is that it's cheaper. So like green coffee beans can last up to 2 years or even more in a cool, dry place.
Okay.
So you can get, a ton of green coffee beans and just store them, and they don't go bad. They don't change their flavor. And then of course the other thing is freshness. So you
Mm.
roast your
Mhm.
coffee beans. And you don't actually grind them right away. It takes a day or so for them to be ready to grind.
Okay.
Um, but you can, I usually roast about once a week, and that, I have fresh coffee that week.
Hmm.
So it just really enhances. To me, it's fun to be involved with that whole process, kind
Okay.
of. And if
Yeah.
I could grow coffee beans, I probably would.
As much of the process as possible.
Yeah,
Fully,
exactly.
fully vertically integrated coffee
Exactly.
operation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So
So,
what are some of your other many hobbies? Or
yeah, some of my other many hobbies. We already talked about robotics a little bit.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed that. Small electronics, 3D printers, that kind of category of
Okay.
things,
Uh-huh.
I really enjoy. The other thing I enjoy is reading. I would consider it a hobby. I don't read as much as I would like to,
Hmm.
but I do enjoy that, especially depending on the book.
Nice. Is there a certain
Um,
kind of a certain genre or type of book that you prefer to read?
I tend to gravitate towards, um, I think it would be considered self-help books.
Hmm.
I know some people don't really enjoy those. Um, but what I mean by self-help is like a good book that I read a little while ago, but fairly recently, Digital Minimalism,
Okay.
a book on technology and how to use it well.
Is that
Um,
Cal Newport or not?
yeah, so
Okay.
the author of Deep Work, a lot of
Yeah.
people are familiar with that. Um, so yeah, I really enjoy his works. I don't agree with him on everything, but I do think he does have some really good points
Hmm.
that should be worth noted. So I tend to gravitate towards those books, but I also enjoy novels as well. Like I just finished Island of the World.
Oh yeah.
Um, that was a really really good book. I could barely put it down at the end.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, so that kind of thing. But I think I tend to be more practical minded, and so I reach for the self-help book, something that could improve, a skill
Yeah.
or I don't know. I tend to reach for that more quickly. It's more interesting. But then I also don't feel as bad putting the book down either. Like I read a little bit and then I'm kind of done, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 So I
It's
don't
not
sit down and read those books for, 3 hours at a time.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna ask if you find yourself reading books that kind of would improve your knowledge of IT and that kind of thing, or is it not necessarily within that vein that you would do a lot of reading?
Yeah, so what I found with books and IT is that IT moves at a faster pace than what books are, um, written. And
Okay.
so you can find really good books concerning information technology, computers, programming, especially some of those things, computer science.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I tend to read like tech blogs
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, where like tech reviews, people talking about or reviewing technology.
Mm-hmm.
I found that to be a lot more helpful and informative um, than sitting down and reading, a book on technology or computers.
Interesting, because it's
Yeah.
almost like if they have time to publish a book, it's almost too far behind. Is that what you're saying?
Right, like you do a book search on Amazon and you look when it was released and it's like 2014,
Yeah.
immediately as a tech person, I'm like, oh, that's antiquated already.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even buy it and it costs $30. So it's no, I'll just Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's probably plenty of blogs and things like that in that space, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Oh my. And most technology is very well documented. So, you buy a piece of software, you can go to their support page and, they have it all outlined, or hardware. You go to the manufacturer's website and all the documentation is there.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's a huge resource it's daunting. I mean, most people, you look at it and say, oh my goodness, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And usually it is, but if you kind of learn how to sift through it and just kind of glean the information you need, it's a really helpful resource.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. Do you find that videos and that kind of media is helpful in the space of learning how to use a type of technology or learning like or finding reviews and things of technology, or do you find that reading is better for you?
Um, YouTube is incredible.
Right, yeah.
Like one of the first things I do is like try to find a YouTube video on the subject.
Hmm.
You have to be careful because oftentimes you'll run across a YouTube video that is like not helpful at all, or the person doesn't actually really know what they're talking
Right.
about.
Yeah.
But over time, you find YouTube channels that that they really do know what they're talking about. That's like the fastest way
Hmm.
of learning something. I'm pretty visually oriented. I think that's
Hmm.
one reason why I gravitate towards YouTube
Yeah.
how-tos and tutorials. You can watch the person, explain how this technology works or how to, solve this
Right.
programming problem or, all of that. It's this visual thing.
Hmm.
Um, so that that's huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely tap into YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, it's for so many things. It's and I think more and more there's people that have found a full-time job on on th- developing their YouTube channel and putting out content that can be really helpful. And like I'm not in the space that you are, but there's so many other spaces too on YouTube that people have made it their job to provide really helpful content on things. So it is an amazing tool, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. One quick story on that subject is there's a YouTube channel that I follow, and he basically tests, new software updates and so forth.
Hmm.
And recently, I upgraded the Wi-Fi system at school, and I hadn't updated it to the latest firmware version. Um, and I was watching this YouTube channel, and he was, testing the software. And basically, there was this huge problem in this new version that would have completely broken my network.
Oh wow.
And so by watching that, or him taking the time to, I mean, he spent, a day doing this.
Okay.
By him doing that for me, saved me probably 3 or 4 days of work trying to recover from, updating to a newer version of firmware, breaking things completely, trying to revert back from a backup and all of that. So
Yeah.
it can be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, that's great. Yeah, were there we were still kind of I guess that we got there from your reading hobby. Were there other hobbies or interests that you wanted to talk about before we get a little bit into your story, or was that kind of the list that you had prepared?
Yeah, I maybe have one more thing
Hmm.
that I think it's important for me personally, and that is I really enjoy outside work, like
Oh,
mowing
yeah.
grass, specifically that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I find that to be incredibly grounding for me. Almost like I need that. I spend so much time in my office or, behind a computer
Yeah.
screen, um, and like being outside and doing physical labor. I think that's essential to stay grounded as a person, as a human, kind of
Hmm.
engaging with God's creation in some way.
Yeah.
Um, and so I really enjoy that kind of thing, so much to the point where I would consider it to be a hobby.
Nice.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
And some weeks I wish the grass would go faster so I could, mow it, but it's partly because I enjoy, garden tractors too. So that's another thing. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. So I guess you wouldn't be very happy in my shoes then. So I'm still like just really satisfied with moving to a second floor apartment a little over a year ago and haven't had to mow the lawn or shovel snow in a
Uh-huh.
little over a year. So
Right.
I guess you wouldn't be happy in my shoes even. I guess
Yeah, I'm
that means we're
afraid. Yeah. I'm afraid I'd feel a little stuck or something. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. but for me, it wasn't enough of a hobby. It was enough work and kept me from doing things that I wanted to do more. I guess
Yeah.
that I haven't missed it yet at this point.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean about it. There is something incredibly satisfying about getting a job like that done, and just something really good about like you said, being in nature, um, being right involved in God's creation. And I think when we're behind a computer screen or something like that, it's probably more important for people like that. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And there's other ways of getting that, whether it's just going for a walk or,
Hmm.
playing a sport or something. Yeah. But for me, it tends to be mowing grass or something.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Okay, yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit where your interest and skills in IT came from. So, if you look back over your life, where can you kind of identify where your interest started and where you started becoming interested in computers and other things technology?
hmm Yeah, so maybe I'll just insert here in the beginning that I hope it's clear kind of throughout my story that I didn't get to where I am on my own. There was a lot of key people kind of pushing me in good
Hmm.
ways throughout my life that have gotten me where I am now. So I hope that's kind of a theme throughout and that it's picked up on.
Hmm.
So ever since I can remember, I love to understand how things work or worked. I was really fascinated by that, and so the easiest way to accomplish that task was to take everything apart.
Okay.
Um, and if my mom is going to listen to this podcast, I'm sorry about all the things I took apart, Mom, because I took apart many things. Um, Anything I was allowed to take apart, I would. Some things I took apart, I wasn't allowed because those are the really fascinating things. And usually they worked when I put them back together.
Hmm.
Not
So you
always,
would
but
try to put them
usually.
back together. You weren't just blowing
Yeah,
them apart. Yeah.
right, exactly. And so, I'd get a new toy or something when I was a little kid.
Oh, okay.
I'd
Wow.
I'd take it apart. I'd
Hmm.
play with it and then I'd take it apart. I loved Legos, anything mechanical with gears or motors,
Oh
that was
yeah.
really fascinating. But I kind of came to this dilemma because I would take things apart and there'd be this little green circuit board thing. It looked like a city with little roads and skyscrapers and stuff.
Yep.
And it did magic. I mean, there was
Yeah.
no rhyme or reason. It didn't make any sound. It just, you plugged a battery in or plugged it into the wall, and it did this incredible thing. And I was like, what is this that I'm seeing? How does this even work? Um, and so that was kind of like that spark into the electronics, computers was this circuit board, this desire to
Okay.
understand what's actually going on in these seemingly magic miniature cities.
Hmm.
Um, and when I think I was about 10 years old or so, I came across this book in the library on building robots from scratch.
Okay.
And what I found was so fascinating about this book about robots was how it explains what a capacitor is, what's a transistor, what is a resistor,
Hmm.
how does, the voltage, flow in a circuit and how to manipulate that to make little, decisions or logic
Yeah.
in the board. And I was hooked. And that's what got me into robotics
Okay.
as well then was
Hmm.
that was kind of the gateway into understanding what these circuit boards do. Now, I'm nowhere close to understanding what modern circuit boards and CPUs do, but anyway, it was like it kind of put me on that journey of trying to understand some of those things. So once I got that book, I started collecting old radios and computers, anything that had circuit boards, and the idea was that I would salvage the parts, right? I would be able
Okay.
to pull the motors off, and capacitors, and then make robots with it.
Hmm.
And it was also a goal of trying to understand these boards as well.
Okay.
So like I got a soldering iron and some of those things. But it wasn't long until people from my community and church learned that I was collecting these things. And if you had an old radio or something, they were like, and they wanted rid of it, they would just give it to me. And so I started collecting all of this stuff,
Uh-huh.
and that kind of evolved into fixing and repairing things. They'd be like, I have this old radio, but it doesn't play a CD. I wish it would. And we're like, oh, let me fix it. So
Okay.
I started fixing radios for people. I mean, it was anything from coffee makers to mixers, it was just a whole range of stuff.
Uh-huh.
And it was also over this time that my parents had this old laptop that they used for QuickBooks for their business.
Mm-hmm.
And the power jack where you plug it in, you'd have to wiggle it just right for it to work or charge. And eventually it gave out.
Oh yeah.
And so they took it to Staples, where they had bought it, and they were like, well, it'll cost $250 to fix it, and we ship it into a facility, so it will take about a week or so.
Right.
And so they're like, well, $250, we'll just invest that into a new, better computer. So they gave it to me, and they were like, well, Carlin, if you fix it, you can have it. I should
Nice.
ask them. I don't think they thought I could fix it. Um, but I went on eBay and bought like a $3 part, the power
Okay.
jack, just a little, barrel jack connector. I took the laptop completely apart. This is the old style. It's just like an inch thick. There's like
Mm-hmm.
5 layers to get through, screws everywhere. And I desoldered the little, barrel connector, soldered on the new one, put everything back together, plugged it in, and it worked.
Nice.
And I was hooked. I mean, this was so cool. And for, a 10 or 11-year-old to have, you know, a laptop, this was, I mean, beyond the best thing that could ever happen to you. I mean, I have my own laptop. This is amazing. Um, and so I just experimented with it. It was Windows XP.
Okay.
And I just played with it, learned how to use it, how to, do simple commands in the command prompt
Nice.
and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And when people heard that I fixed this laptop, pretty soon I had more computers, at my door ready to get fixed as well. And so throughout my teenage years, it was not uncommon for me to have like one or two computers a week, that
Okay.
I
Wow.
would fix. And I would
Wow.
just do it as, donation basis, right? Like if I
Mm-hmm.
can fix it, great. If I can't, then there's no, I mean, you just get it back or whatever.
Right.
And kind of through that, I ended up with a bunch of old technology as well, because if I couldn't fix it or if it wasn't worth fixing, then they would just let me have it.
Oh yeah.
Um, so that really kind of got me started in the realm of fixing computers and
Mm-hmm.
technology. And it just kind of, the more you learn, the more you want to know about it. It kind of just naturally took its course on that.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a pretty significant moment for me. One was my uncle Daniel gave me a desktop computer, I think it was, to fix, and I fixed it for him. And they had come over to our house, so I gave it back, and he like wrote me a check. And to me, it was really generous amount. Like it was generous.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, and he said that you need to start charging people for your work.
Okay.
Um, and that was a really significant shift. And it was kind of this thing where like, oh, maybe what I'm doing here actually does have value, and I can offer this as a service.
Mm-hmm.
And he really pushed me in that direction. And so a couple years after that, maybe I think it was a few years after that. I'm not sure on the exact timing there. Anyway, he uh, kind of through his work where he worked at the time, got me a job offer essentially at an accounting firm. And they didn't have any IT personnel at the time,
Okay.
but they were growing and they got large enough where it was just too much to handle. And no one was dedicated to work in IT or anything. And so they kind of needed a person for that role.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied. I would have been 18
Okay.
at the time. I applied and got the job.
Nice.
So I moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 18 years old, moved in with a family I didn't know. A
Okay.
long story there. Really, really fun. I look back at that as really a pivotal point in my life in some ways.
Nice. That's great.
Um, but kind of through that job experience, I really learned kind of the business world of computer networks, right? So it
Okay.
wasn't just fixing a laptop or a smartphone or a desktop computer or a radio, right? It's like this physical hardware that you're working on. It was like, here's this overarching, here's our office, and we have, 30 computers connected to it, plus laptops and phones, and we have wireless, and we have the cable networks, and we have servers and switches and all of these things.
Yeah.
And it was just like this crash course in the small office networking and
Yeah.
server infrastructure.
I was gonna ask, did you have any experience with that going into that, or were you kind of learning on the fly in that job?
Yeah, I did not have any experience with that,
Okay.
and so I was learning on the fly. And I was also learning in an environment that was actively being used, right? So you
Right.
can't just experiment on something and make a change and then everything breaks. Then you have 30 employees that are a little upset at you for breaking the network. um, so I had to kind of be careful with that. I don't have any horror stories about that. That went pretty smoothly.
Hmm.
What I did is I set up my own little test environment, where I could experiment on my own stuff
Okay.
without needing to work on the live environment.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Um, but here again, like my uncle Daniel really pushed me in a good direction. My first boss, he invested a lot of money in me in a lot of ways, even though I was a flight risk in some ways because I was young. I could jump to different things,
Uh-huh.
and he paid me to watch courses online,
Okay. Wow.
and he was pretty tech savvy himself. And so what he did was he created this big long list on what used to be lynda.com,
Okay. Yeah.
which is now LinkedIn Learning. And he was like, here are the courses I want you to take. Just sit down and take them. So I spent like 2 weeks nonstop just watching video courses.
Okay. Like
And then
basically on the
throughout the
job.
next, right, and then
Yeah.
that throughout the next couple of years, while I worked there, I would take courses on the side as well.
Okay. Well.
Um, and that's kind of how I learned. And a problem would come up, I would just Google how to fix it if I didn't know how to fix it.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a really, sometimes really stressful way to learn, but really effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. How long did you work there then?
I worked there a little over 2.5 years. I think it was, yeah, 2 years, 6 or 7 months.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And did you have another job in between there and then when you started at your current position at Faith Builders, or did you go right from one to the next?
I went right from one to the next.
Okay.
Yeah. So I jumped right from working at the accounting firm to volunteering. I volunteered for a year at Faith Builders
Okay.
before I assumed the admin role.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very good and yeah, fascinating what yeah, kind of the how something that's like you said there were lots of people that were pivotal in helping you along that journey, and I always find it fascinating to think about whether you could have pictured as a 15-year-old, for instance, where you are now. Could you have, or is it kind of something that kind of developed and there were people and experiences and circumstances and things that kind of formed you to be the person in the place that you are now? How would you
Hmm.
describe that?
Yeah, so like at 15, I probably would have pictured myself on a construction crew, for example.
Okay, yeah,
Because like in my community, that was kind of the thing you did as a young man is you got a job, working for the local construction company, and that's what you did for a few years. And then
hmm,
often people kind of move on from that. So I kind of pictured that's something that I would do. Um, I also, like my family lived right near Bald Eagle Boys Camp. And
hmm.
so in the back of my mind, I always kind of pictured myself being a chief
Okay,
once I turned 21 and kind of pursuing some of those things. Um, but that never really materialized. So yeah, definitely when I was a teenager, I would not have envisioned myself being at Faith Builders
yeah,
or working in an IT admin role as I am now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I guess just what I was thinking with that is it's come up a few times in conversations that I've had on the podcast, just how important the conversations that our mentors have with us can how impactful those can be in shaping our future, shaping who we are, and then just the reminder to think about those conversations that we have with people that look up to us, and
Yeah.
the positive impact that we can have on people, and
Hmm.
I mean it, with when we have that kind of influence, we also have to think about that we could be a negative influence, and to take
Hmm.
a role like that seriously as well. So
Right. Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
great to hear with your story there.
Yeah.
Just another kind of different question that I have sometime when I see people like you that are really good in fixing things and solving problems, that kind of thing. Do you know why it is that people are so eager to like, so for instance, when you were a teenager, you said that you often had laptops to fix or gadgets, that kind of thing to fix. Why is it that people are often more willing to bring something to someone they know like you than to take it to a repair shop or take it to a professional that would be able to fix it or solve their problem? Do you know why that is?
I have some ideas. Whether they're right or not, I don't know. Um, I think the big thing is that in my community, a lot of people actually cared about me and my family, and that kind of came through with them giving me stuff. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is that I was cheap, right? So
Yeah,
they could give
yeah,
it to me, and if I couldn't fix it, it didn't cost them anything, and they could take it somewhere else and have it fixed.
right, yeah.
Um, so I kind of see those two things. The other thing is that I mean, I hope I was trustworthy. I think I was. If you know someone, you're more likely to trust that person.
Right.
And I think that was the case for me because most of the computers I fixed, it was people I knew or people that knew my dad or mom.
Mm-hmm.
There were some that I fixed in the community that heard about me kind of through the grapevine and be like, oh, I know this person, and they said that this guy does
Mm-hmm.
this. And so it kind of started to grow when I was a teenager, and word started to spread. And so there was people in the community that I fixed computers for. Um,
Okay.
but that wasn't as much as it was people I knew and in my
Yeah.
circles. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. The trust factor of it, because even if I hear that someone else had a good experience at a repair shop or something like that, I'll be more likely to be willing to go to some place like that rather than if I have no context or no relationship with them at all. So I guess the
Right.
trust thing is big with when we have no idea what's wrong with our computer or our car or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, I guess thinking a little bit more about the role that you're currently involved in now, and so being IT of not a large organization, I guess, if you compare it to some big companies or big schools or that kind of thing, but you still do have a
Hmm.
fairly significant computer system to work with there. So maybe getting a little deeper into that, what are some of the skills that you need in order to kind of coordinate a network of computers, and um, in order for a school like Faith Builders to be able to have a well working system?
Hmm. Um, that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure how to answer it, but there's a couple of things that come to mind. And the first one is good people skills. At an organizational level, a place like a school, and working in technology, which a lot of people, don't understand the inner workings of technology. I think it's really important to be able to articulate how a computer, might function or what
Hmm.
the problem is and how to fix it. How to make people feel comfortable when they bring their personal device to you that's broken. Like I did something stupid. I spilled water on my laptop, can you,
Mm, mm-hmm.
like it can be a humbling thing. And so, some people, it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so good people skills, I think, is essential at, helping, maintain and keep the IT running smoothly, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess
Um,
you're not just working on your own. You're um you're working through your job with technology. You're working with all the other people in the organization to help them use the system and that kind of thing. So you're
right.
yeah, you are very much always working with other people. I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like my job is to make sure that everyone else can do their work well
Hmm.
and efficiently.
Yeah.
And so that involves people a lot. So yeah, for any IT person, good people skills is, I think, essential.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Maybe another thing I would think about would be understanding the pressure points.
Hmm.
Um, and so that can take time. I have the benefit of being in-house IT, which, I live kind of by and work with this organization. And so over time, you begin to understand where the points of pressure might be, and you can, then do something about that. So I think
So
that's really important. Yeah.
yeah. So by points of pressure, do you mean the places that an issue would be more likely to occur, or where things might break down first? Or what do you
Well,
mean by points of pressure?
I think maybe more generally in the sense of like, what does this organization really care about?
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're a business and you have 10 employees and they really care that their work is efficient,
Mm-hmm.
that means certain things for the tech person, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means you need computers that have, enough RAM and CPU power and a solid state hard drive, those kinds of things. Or if they're into, if they edit video or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that means certain things. And that goes for any organization, is like what they really care about, what's moving their mission or, forward, and getting behind that too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for the IT person to understand that, because technology, I mean, intersects with our lives so much in
Yeah.
any environment. Um, and small changes make a big difference, especially over time.
Hmm.
And so to understand what the mission is of your organization and how to get behind that
Yeah.
is really important.
So what's an example of something that you've kind of been able to help out the mission of your workplace of Faith Builders through your work with IT? Do you have an example right off?
Um, Let me think. I think maybe one thing is the relational aspect at Faith Builders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is the best example. I'd have to think about it maybe a bit more, but like Faith Builders really cares about relationships
Mm-hmm.
and in-person interaction, which over COVID here has provided some challenges with
Mm-hmm.
that. How do we get the best possible experience that fosters good relationships and in-person or good communication?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so one thing I did is I bought a what's called a meeting owl,
Okay.
and it's a 360 degree camera.
Oh,
And
okay.
so over COVID, when students had to go home, um, that could be used. And what that did, it's like a webcam, a fancy webcam.
Okay.
So that camera does really well when it's part of a small group or small meeting or even a classroom.
Okay.
So let's say that you have in-person instruction. Most of your students are there, but you might have 2 or 3 students that aren't feeling well or something and have to quarantine or be, somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
With a meeting owl, you can set that in the front of your classroom, and the student can see all the other people in the classroom and the instructor. They can hear well, they can speak and be heard well in the classroom.
Okay.
Like trying to, work hard at making sure that there's good interaction in all the fronts. It's not just a little camera
Yeah.
view, and the person that's remote kind of loses out on the relational aspect of things.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't do that 100% with technology, but from my perspective as a technologist, trying to support FB's goal of relationships, so to speak, that was one way that I could help foster that.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be probably one example I would think of offhand. The other thing I would think of is at Faith Builders is making technology take the back seat. Or what I mean by that,
Hmm.
it's easy to allow technology to be kind of flashy or
Hmm.
cool, right? Like I got the new latest and greatest gadget, and oh, it's really neat and nifty, and people are interested in it, and so on. But that can be really distracting. And an organization like Faith Builders, we need and use functional technology, but we try to make sure it's not the focus, so to
Yeah.
speak, or it's
Yeah.
not distracting or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And but I also think that one of the best ways to make technology take a back seat is if it works. So I liked what you said about it being functional is
Hmm.
is being important in that. It's
Yeah,
it's 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 just the best when you don't know it's there, when you don't even think about that it's there. That's
right,
for sure.
exactly. Yeah.
That's great. Getting this is maybe a question that that comes from my curiosity and lack of knowledge on things, but getting a little bit technical with your work here. How would you describe what the purpose of a computer server is? Or like, yeah, can you
Hmm.
describe in a couple minutes kind of what a server does and why it's beneficial to a business or organization?
Yeah, so servers actually are pretty simple, and most of our modern technology operates on a client server model, where
Okay.
basically all a server is a computer that serves or sends information to a client computer that requests it or asks for it.
Okay.
So a good example is the internet as we know
Hmm.
it, right? So you open up a browser, a web browser, Google Chrome or something like that.
Hmm.
That's a client. And
Okay.
when you type in google.com, you're requesting to access, a resource from Google, and their server will respond and send back the page you request, right?
Okay.
Um, and so essentially servers are kind of the lifeblood of modern technology in many ways. So businesses, you might have a database,
Hmm.
and you might have, 10 employees that need to access that database. Well, it wouldn't really make sense for all 10 computers to have a copy of the database and try to sync changes, or that would
Right.
get really messy.
Yeah.
But if you have one server that hosts the database and manages those 10 connections or 10 clients when they're accessing that database, and just sends them the information they're requesting, that really simplifies things.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so servers can be really confusing though too, even though at the basic level they're pretty simple. And one reason is because a lot of times when I would say a server, yeah, I mean those, it might be software that it's or some kind of service that the server is giving to clients.
Hmm.
But it also kind of defines the physical box or device that a server
Oh,
tends to be or form
yeah.
factor. um, and servers often run critical or mission critical infrastructure or software, right? And so oftentimes what that means is that in a server, it's kind of like a really fancy desktop computer.
Okay.
But it has often, not always, but often has redundancies built right into the machine. So
Okay.
it will usually have two power supplies.
Oh,
So if one power supply dies, the server still is running fine on one, and you can actually just pull out the bad power supply, slide in a new one, and plug it in, and it's good to go. Like you can do that hot swappable, it's called. You can hot swap. hardware on servers, so
Okay.
that you can maintain uptime. Um, Often servers, they are designed to go in what's called a server rack. So it's like this rack that might be, it's about 3 feet wide and maybe 6 to 8 feet tall.
Okay.
And you have rails, kind of like you would on a drawer, or
Mm-hmm.
in a cabinet or whatever. And the server fits on those rails, so you can slide it in and out of the server rack.
Okay.
And then you just stack servers in the server rack, floor to ceiling, kind of
Okay.
thing. So you might have 10, 20 servers in a server rack, all doing their work.
Okay.
Um, and so the form factor is different than what you think of. Like, they're not they don't look good like a desktop computer does. Like, no
Right.
fancy LEDs or anything. They're just like this pretty basic box with fans, and they're pretty loud. Um, but they often have two power supplies. Sometimes they have up to four CPUs in
Okay.
them. A lot of processing power,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of RAM. For example, I have two servers at FB. Each of them have 256 gigabytes of RAM.
Okay.
So, like, you might buy a new laptop and it might have 8 gigabytes of RAM, or 12 or 16, or
Right. Yeah.
like, that's plenty RAM for most things. But on a server, you often need a lot more resources.
Okay.
So they're basically, you could kind of think of it like a souped up desktop computer.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask, is it's like the main purpose of it is to be able to network. So like many different people can kind of pull from the same pool of information. Is that a way to think about their purpose?
Yeah. There's a whole variety of different purposes
Right.
for servers. So you might have a server called a domain controller, which essentially controls the network. So when you plug in a desktop computer into the network,
Mm-hmm.
it needs an IP address. It needs some way of telling the network where it is, who the computer is, what information it's sending and receiving, where the network should send that information.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when you plug in that desktop computer, it sends a request to the domain controller, and it will send back its address. It will hand out that address lease, essentially.
Okay.
So that'd be like maybe one purpose of the network, is controlling that. Or domain controllers also control username and passwords. So
Oh
in
yeah.
a business environment, um, you'll typically be given a set of credentials, right? Username and a password.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you might want to sign into multiple computers with a username and password.
Right.
Traditionally, you would have to, create a user account on each computer, and that user account would be on that physical computer itself.
Mm-hmm.
But with a domain controller, or similar kind of server, that server can actually manage the credentials, so that I could go to any computer in the organization, if given the right permissions,
Mm-hmm.
and sign in with my username and password, and it would log me into the computer. And if I have access to a certain set of files, it could give me access to those files. It could pull in my wallpaper. It could do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually authenticating against the server. So when I type
Okay.
in my username and password, in the background, the desktop will send a request to the server. The server will check the credentials and say, yep, he has the correct username and password, and send that back to the desktop, and it'll let me in.
Okay. So is
So
that is that essentially the same thing as me going to someone else's computer and logging into my Gmail account?
yeah, I mean, essentially, it's a very similar process,
Okay. Yeah.
except, I mean, you're logging into a web interface, not a user account per se on a desktop
Right.
or operating system.
Yeah, but I guess I was thinking of it that I'm accessing it from a totally different machine than my normal laptop where I would access it, but I still am connected to Google's server or whatever,
Right.
wherever it
Hmm.
would be that I'm getting that from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Is that something that you would have learned about at the job that you had at that accounting firm when you were 18, or were you working with servers and things there?
Right. Yeah, that was
Okay.
kind of my introduction to servers. I mean, I knew some about servers before working at the accounting firm, but not not a lot. Um, so that was yeah, that was a really kind of scary introduction to servers because I mean, this was an accounting firm. They had all kinds of sensitive data stored on this
Yeah.
servers. They had a bunch of them, and it was my job to make sure they worked and to fix them when they broke. And
Yeah.
that's yeah, it's a little scary.
Well, that leads right into my next question. So, what are some of the things that you do to ensure against problems happening? So, I guess two that I thought of is crashes and losing data, and the other one that I hear about sometimes with like businesses and things like that is hacks. So,
Hmm.
are those two things that you're concerned about?
Oh my, yes. Um, So the number one thing you can do is backups, backups, backups,
Hmm.
backups. You can never have too many backups. Always back things up.
Hmm.
That is like your number one line of defense when it comes to hardware failure, any kind of malware, hacks,
Okay.
accidental file deletion. Things happen. Um, you need to have backups.
So does that mean you're essentially having like two identical servers with the exact same information or not?
You can set it up in multiple ways where you could, in what you just mentioned, you could have identical servers and they would sync live the data or the changes, right?
Okay, yep.
And so if one would die, you would just, fail over to the second one and run
Hmm.
off of that one and it would be like nothing ever happened.
Yep.
Um, that is one of the most common systems in, most medium to large businesses. On a
Okay.
small business scale, it's really expensive to run two servers because if you have to buy a $50,000 server, and let's say you're using 75% of its resources, you're going to need another $50,000 server to, fail over to, right?
Right,
So a
yeah.
lot of people on a small business scale don't necessarily do that.
Okay.
Um, as hardware gets cheaper and software gets better, it's becoming more and more common. But typically, what you would do is that you would just have backups, and it can be pretty old school, like an external hard drive that you plug
Oh,
into the
okay.
server, and it just, every night backs up to that.
Hmm.
Um, or the most common thing these days is cloud backups, right? I just,
Oh, okay. Yep.
it's connected to the internet. I have a good internet connection. I'll just back everything up to the cloud. If the server dies, it's not a big deal. We just get another one, plug it in, and we'll download all of our, data, and we'll be good to go.
Yeah. So
So,
I guess a disadvantage of that is it would take a little bit of time
right.
to get a new server and get the data
Yeah.
loaded up onto that again, but
Right.
it's still there.
Right.
At least, yeah. Uh-huh.
And what's
So,
really, what's really interesting is that in the cloud world or the data center world we live in now, you can actually have, an on-site physical server and run all your data and stuff, back it up to the cloud. And if your physical server dies, in like 3 minutes, you can purchase a set amount of, processing power and RAM, etc., whatever you need to run your business critical applications in the cloud, boot up your
oh,
software and run it right from the cloud.
oh wow.
Like, yeah,
So they
it's
have it
pretty
like
cool.
it's set up that you can just pay for it if you would need it in that emergency situation,
Right.
basically. Wow.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
that's that's pretty neat. Is it expensive to I don't know, rent, is that the right word, but to use a cloud for huge backups like on an organizational level like that? Or is it fairly reasonable considering other options?
It can be pretty reasonable, but it can also be pretty expensive depending on the extent of your data.
Yeah.
So, like if you're trying to back up 20 terabytes into the cloud, that becomes unpractical pretty soon because, like, if you have a standard internet connection, I mean, weeks. It'll take you weeks to upload that amount of data,
Right.
months.
Yeah.
And then if you need to access the data and you don't have it set up where you can just boot up your mission critical applications, then that company has to send you, a hard drive with all that data on it.
Okay.
Um, Typically, I'm trying to remember the cost. I think I did some calculations recently for about 10 to 14 terabytes of cloud storage from a
Hmm.
company called Backblaze. They're really
Okay.
cool. And they are some of the cheapest cloud storage on the market. I think it would have been around $70 to $80 a month for
Okay.
around 14 terabytes.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's very reasonable.
Okay.
But like Amazon Web Services and stuff, they'd be more expensive.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's fascinating. So, I guess another threat besides just losing your I mean something failing and you losing your data would be hacks. So is that something that you have to think about and protect against?
Yes. So hacks or malware,
Hmm.
um, probably is, if anything would worry me, it would be that. I'm not necessarily worried about it, but um, that's probably the more likely scenario to actually happen.
Okay.
Um, and it's easy to think that we're a small organization, nobody knows about us, so who's going to target us, right?
Right.
Well, it's not really about being targeted specifically. Hackers groups, whatever, they tend to use software and they'll
Okay.
do massive scans, right? So if you have a website and it has a portal to log in, or you have a public facing IP address for your business or your organization,
Right.
they'll do these massive scans to scan for vulnerabilities, right? So
So
it doesn't matter.
what do you mean by a scan?
So they'll have an application that they can run that it will scan the internet essentially,
Okay.
or certain facets or a range of IP addresses or
Okay.
addresses out there in the internet. And what it will do is it will test those addresses for vulnerabilities or little
Oh,
holes in the network.
okay.
Let's say that you use remote desktop. So if you're working from home, your business sets up remote desktop so you can use that to log into your work PC. Um, Depending on how they did that, that's like opening up a giant hole in your network,
Okay.
right? And so these scanners can actually scan for those holes. And when they find a hole, then they just attack them, right? Oh, here's a vulnerability. Let's just throw the book at it, right? Here's the known vulnerabilities. Here's how we know how to hack that, etc.
Okay.
So now that's oversimplifying things, and that's not always the case. But the point there is that it really doesn't matter if you're an individual, if you're a business, or who knows what.
Yeah.
If you have a vulnerable system, you can get, you know, caught because you were just found on some massive, huge, I mean, ginormous, astronomical scale scan.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's all like, I mean, this is, a scan run by, really powerful computers and so on. Um, so what I'm trying to say is like, don't fall trap to thinking that I'm a nobody. No one's going to try to hack me.
Right. Yeah.
Um, like, yeah. So one of the best things you can do is have good passwords. And I know people talk about this a lot, but it is true. Have strong passwords, enable two-factor authentication when you can.
Okay.
And two-factor authentication is like, let's say you go to log into your bank account, you enter your username and password, you hit enter, then it asks for a code. It will text you a code. You enter
Hmm.
that code in, and then it will let you through.
Okay. So
So
that is actually helpful for keeping um it's malware or hackers from accessing it. Like that makes it tougher for them to access your data.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And it's not, 100% effective, but it's a lot more difficult to break that.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and so in technology, this probably won't be any surprise, but there's no way to be 100% protected. Like
Right.
you just can't be. Um, but you can make it so difficult that it's not worth trying,
Oh, yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of your goal is to
Hmm.
make it as difficult as possible for any, scanning software or hacker or person or malware or whatever. You want to make that as difficult as possible for them to break or get into whatever kind of, software or account you use.
Yeah. What's uh what's the goal of a hacker? I don't know if that's the best term to use for someone like that, but what's their goal in attacking a system or in even attacking like someone personally? Are they trying to find personal data, or what's their goal in in writing the software, or or trying to get into other people's systems?
Hmm. Well, in the good old days, it used to be you would hack for fun, right? It was a
Yeah,
challenge or kind of a practical joke. Um, but um, people quickly realized that you could make a lot of money by breaking into systems, whether that's I steal your data and then I threaten to make it go public unless you pay me money,
right.
or I you know install a little application that makes your computer mine cryptocurrency, right? And
Oh, I
I
see. So
have
use your computing power. Is
right,
that,
but I
yeah.
might infect 20,000 computers and they're all working like little minions to,
Hmm.
mine cryptocurrency for me, right? So the main motivation is simply money.
Yeah.
Sometimes um, this happens often with state-sponsored hackers is to steal information.
Right.
And that gets, yeah, really crazy and complicated. And there's been some really advanced um, hacks, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I mean, beyond the scope of my knowledge and what happens. But there is a lot of that going on more than what we know.
Okay.
And it can be pretty scary,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But the main motivation is money, and the most popular thing these days is called ransomware.
Okay, I was just gonna ask you
So
about that. Yeah.
yeah, that's my number one fear from a
Hmm.
tech perspective. Being responsible for an organization, that's probably the most likely thing to happen.
So what is it, or how would you describe ransomware?
So ransomware is a virus or malware that once your computer is infected, it'll kind of lie low for a bit. And then what it will do is it will scan for any kind of cloud connections, like you might have OneDrive or Google Drive,
Hmm.
or like files stored on a network. It'll scan for all of that stuff and take an inventory of that. And then in the background, it'll work for, sometimes days to silently encrypt, scramble all of your data.
Oh, okay.
And the encryption is so strong that it's practically impossible to break the encryption
Hmm.
without the encryption key or the
Okay.
decryption key. And so what it will do is, let's say that your laptop was infected by malware, you would have no idea until the next day. You would come, you'd sit down on your computer, you would boot it up, and you'd get this blank screen, and it would they're really kind and curious, like, courteous to you. Like, we're so sorry, but your computer has been infected with, blah, blah, blah. They'll give you this big spiel and explain that, your computer has been infected with ransomware. And to get your decryption key and all your files back, you have to pay them, let's say, $1,000 in Bitcoin. And they'll give you their Bitcoin address. They'll give you links on how to buy Bitcoin and how to send it to them. And then once you do that, they'll send you the decryption key.
Okay.
And they have the reputation of being honest criminals in the sense of, like, they will send you the correct encryption key, right?
Well, they
Like they
have to
wouldn't,
for it to work, right? Like for
right?
people to actually do it.
Exactly, exactly. But it's really frustrating because, like, you can't use your computer at all.
Huh.
Nothing,
Yeah.
typically. So, and they can charge any amount they want to.
Yeah.
Um,
Doesn't it happen like to businesses and organizations too, like where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars they'll charge for.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And what's really unfortunate is like hospitals have been targeted
Hmm.
recently.
Wow.
Um, and if you think about it, it's if you're a hacker, it's a really good target because here's an organization that it's life and death literally for them to
Yeah.
have their computer systems operating well. And if you infect their whole network and suddenly everything is locked, they will pay you whatever you ask them to. And so, yeah, so sometimes that can get a little scary with
Yeah.
some of those
Wow.
kinds of organizations.
Man, you
Um,
must have to have like no conscience to be able to uh to be able to hack something where people's lives are at stake
yeah,
and and go through with that. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
That's
I don't know
something.
what goes through their minds.
Yeah. So, do you need to, on an organizational level, do you need to like, is there software you need to have and thing to protect a system, or are you doing things just like I should be doing for my personal computer?
Hmm. So there definitely are things that I do and that organizations do. One is have a good firewall, which essentially it's like the first thing that you would from the internet side that you would
Okay.
come up against when you would get to that specific network. So a firewall blocks any connections except what you allow through it, right?
Okay.
So you can allow uh, information to go from, let's say, the inside to the internet, but not from the internet to the inside.
Yeah.
Or you can allow information to go from the internet to the inside and not from the inside to the internet. Or you can allow, both ways, or you can do all kinds of things.
Okay.
And the goal there is you could kind of think of it like the Canadian and American border, right? There are certain
Mm-hmm.
points of entry, right?
Right.
It's a lot easier to know who's going where and why when there's specific points of entry.
Right.
You can manage that a lot easier. It's the same thing with a firewall,
Hmm.
is that you open up certain holes in the network, let's say for internet traffic, um, but then you monitor that hole. But
Hmm.
everything else might be blocked, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so a good firewall is paramount in protecting your network.
Hmm.
Um, Up-to-date operating systems is also really important. They issue
Okay.
patches and fixes for vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So up-to-date operating systems and good antivirus software. Although with Windows 10, they have Windows Defender built in, which actually is a decent antivirus. So it's less and less important nowadays to actually go buy something like Norton or, something like that.
Okay.
But here's the problem is that your environment is only as strong as your weakest link. And
Okay.
um, your weakest link comes down to people, right? Like I might get an email and it has an attachment and it
Hmm.
looks legitimate. Here's an invoice. Okay, I bought something recently. I open it and it might be a Word document or a PDF, but it injects some code somewhere, downloads a little client in the background. It downloads the ransomware, crypto locker software. It encrypts my system and everything else on my network.
Hmm.
And it came right through the firewall because it looked like a legitimate email, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so the best thing you can do is have um, good training in place for
Hmm.
people to know what to watch for and how to be safe,
Yeah.
um, is really what it comes down to. Um,
Yeah.
there's some really good resources out there. One is called Know Before, um, and it's spelled like KNOWBE and then the number four.
Okay.
And they do training.
Hmm.
It's a software company where you can actually set up fake phishing emails, they're called. So, as the
Oh.
IT person in my organization, I could create a very legitimate looking email,
Uh-huh.
send it out to all employees, and see who clicks on it.
Wow, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, yeah. And then they have all kinds of different training tools and information, and you over time train your users what to watch for, right? So if it's an
Mm-hmm.
invoice, what kind of invoice is it? What's the sent from address?
Mm-hmm.
If there's a link in an email, if you just hover your mouse over the link, down in the bottom left-hand corner of your display, it usually shows the URL.
Oh,
And if you
okay.
look at that URL, you might be like, okay, the link says this, but the URL is really fishy. Then that
Yeah.
probably means it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
Um, so training your users on what to watch for, good, what's a spam email or a phishing email,
Mm-hmm.
um, those kinds of things, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing about like companies like, or I don't know if it's a company that you were talking about the know before thing, but people that have come up with these creative ways to help people solve problems, and that's just so neat to hear about the that
Hmm.
that kind of thing is out there. Um, yeah, thanks for sharing those things about that. In our last few minutes here, I thought it'd be fun to get just a little bit more general. I know that you like to think about technology because you're working in it all the time, and like to think about how it affects us as people and that kind of thing. So, I had a couple questions for you about what you think, maybe philosophically, a little bit more about technology. But just what I thought would be a fun question before we get a little bit more into the philosophy of it. Is there any type of technology that you've heard about or have maybe even experienced a little bit that you would describe as blowing your mind, or you're just amazed at what it can do?
Hmm. That constantly changes.
Yeah.
I'd say probably currently would be quantum computers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are really cool and crazy, right? Like you have a qubit, it might be in one state or another state, or both states at the same time. Um, anyway, really fascinating stuff, and it definitely blows my mind. Um,
So just
but
on the, does it practically for computing, is it going to be able to do just way faster than we've had up at to this point, or what's going to be the practical benefit of it if the technology keeps developing?
yeah, so right now one of the problems with quantum computers is they're like I haven't looked at the number recently, but just over, so I could be wrong on this, but just over 50% of the time accurate, which is
Oh, okay.
not very, you're trying to
Yeah.
do some mathematical calculation, right? Not very helpful if you're only accurate 51 or 2% of the time,
Right.
but they do get better and better. And the main benefit is, yes, is it's speed, um,
Okay. Yep.
which presents some problems because, as I understand it, they'll be so fast that like our modern day, what we use for encryption, right? So like you go to a website and it's HTTPS and then the URL of the website. That's like hypertext transport layer, it's secured. Um, and so it's a protocol that's encrypted, right? So
Okay.
the information coming from the server to my laptop, all of that information traveling through the internet is being encrypted so that it can't be, you can't, someone in the middle can't just be reading all of that information, right?
Okay. Yep.
Well, a quantum computer theoretically could be so good that it would render all of that encryption essentially useless,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Which presents some interesting problems.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, some fun things to think about there, but it'll all work out. We'll figure out ways of making better encryption. We'll use
Yeah, I was
quantum
gonna say,
computers to make encryption. Yeah,
couldn't you have the quantum computer doing the encryption, or is that what you were just
right.
saying there? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Very good. So thinking about, or were you did you have something else you were gonna say about technology that blows your mind, or was that the only one that you had in mind there?
There would be some honorable mentions, I think. I think the other one I was thinking of is called gallium nitride. I don't know if you've ever heard of gallium nitride, but it's a kind of
No.
semiconductor, kind of like
Okay.
silicon is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's way more efficient with uh, transferring power.
Oh,
And
okay.
so in the next few years, we'll be hopefully seeing like smaller and smaller power bricks to charge your cell phone. But you
Oh,
might have a
okay.
little brick the size of your cell phone charger. You plug that into a wall, you could charge your phone and your laptop from
Oh
the
wow.
same little, you know, charger. Um, so with gallium nitride, we'll see some of those things. So it's something worth Googling and looking into. It's a really cool emerging technology.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's that's really neat, and it's always amazing how you think that, oh, they must be reaching about the edge of how good computers can be, but then someone like you knows, oh, there's still lots of room for improvement out there. So
Yeah.
it's amazing. So yeah, thinking a little bit about technology. So from your observations, what what observations would you have on the effect that technology has on people as we keep seeing technology develop, and as we were just talking about there's probably not an end in sight at this point for how technology is going to keep developing. It'll probably keep developing faster and faster, actually.
Hmm.
But yeah, do you have any observations on the effect that that can have on us as people?
Hmm. Well, I guess it kind of depends on what we mean by technology, right? So, what are we talking about? Are we talking about laptops, the internet, social media, those kinds of things? One thing I think about, and this is more in general to the internet, blogs, social media,
Mm-hmm.
that category of thing is one thing that I'm starting to see and feel, and this is a personal perspective, so could be wrong. There could be a lot of others out there. But is everyone seems to be their own expert,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting topic for your podcast.
Yeah.
I would love to hear someone talk about that who's really studied this. Um, but I have some friends in the medical field and so on, and like I've done it where you Google what you're feeling first
Mm-hmm.
and read about it, and then you think and then the expert tells you something differently, and you're like, well, no, actually, this or that. Um, and what's unfortunate with social media is that Facebook and Instagram, like your news feed is so individualized.
Yeah.
So let's just imagine that you and I had the exact same friends.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything was identical. But what would be really interesting about that is when I would scroll through my Facebook feed, you and I should be, and you would scroll through yours, theoretically, you and I should see the same thing, right? Because we have the exact same friends, we've liked the exact same pages, everything's identical. But actually, we would be seeing different things
Okay.
because I might be more interested in this specific, Facebook page, so I spend more time there than what you do.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to see more things regarding that Facebook page.
Yeah.
Um, and
Do they even calculate, like, if you would pause for a couple seconds on a post, do they calculate that?
yes, as I understand it, they would. And
Yeah,
so,
I,
like,
I, I thought they must, just because
hmm
it seems like if I pause on someone's post and spend even a couple seconds reading it, it seems like uh, I'm more likely to see that person's post again. It's incredible
yeah,
how they've figured us out.
yeah, and like your feed is being generated essentially in real time. So,
Yeah.
like, when you are scrolling, you might, pause for 5 seconds on one post, and then you scroll past the next three. But they'll serve you something up that'll come up from that post you paused 5 seconds at because
Okay. Oh wow.
you spent more time there. You're more interested in that post, and therefore they're going to serve content, based on that.
Yeah.
Um, it is really scary. Maybe I'll just make a little insert here. There's a really cool documentary on the subject. It's called The Social Dilemma. I don't know if
Okay.
you've heard of it or not.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about it. Yeah, I've never seen it, but
It's worth watching. And one reason why I say that is because I felt they did a really good job of explaining how or what happens behind the scenes at Facebook.
okay.
So for a non-technical person, you don't need to know anything about computers, and you can watch that documentary and have a pretty good understanding of what the algorithm or what the software is doing.
Hmm.
Um, and it's really helpful in understanding that. Um, I didn't feel like it had a really hopeful end, my opinion there. Um, but their website offers some steps you can take. So I tend to like material like Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, which is much more focused on how the individual, how can I interact with this technology better.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a worthwhile read. I would, if you're going to do one or the other, read Digital Minimalism.
Okay. Yeah.
um, but the Social Dilemma is definitely worth watching for sure.
Okay. Nice. So yeah, you were. I think we got it. You were kind of talking about how everyone's become an expert or that kind of thing. Where did you have more to say on that, or on your observations of technology?
Yeah, I don't know if I had more to say on that, except that I think we need to be thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a problem, and it seems to only be getting worse. And I think I was talking about social media in the sense that, I might join Facebook groups and everyone agrees with me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like everyone agrees with me, but that's
Yeah.
because the content that I like, Facebook is showing me more content that I like, and
Mm-hmm.
I eventually get surrounded with people with like-minded opinions.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not helpful, I don't think. And
Yeah.
so we need to be careful about that and be thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and technology is essentially, extensions of ourselves, of our beings in some ways. And technology changes us. And
Hmm.
we need to be thinking about that for sure. And another thing I think I'm observing is it seems like the more we develop technology, the more individualistic it becomes, or how it encourages isolation more.
Hmm.
Um, I think of virtual reality, for example.
Hmm.
Um, you put on a headset and you are in your own world. Um, I don't think that's who we're called to be or meant to live as God created us. And so I think we need to be thinking about some of the costs that are associated with technology, and as it advances, what are we paying? What are we paying to benefit from this technology? What are the
Hmm.
offsets?
Yeah.
Because with anything, there's usually a cost somewhere. And what is
Right.
that cost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be it can help people to get together too in certain settings. You were talking about
Mm-hmm.
that device that you bought that's for the school to help connect students that were away or that kind of thing. So
Right.
it can do that too. But yeah, I like the thoughtfulness there of thinking about when it can be a negative in causing us to be isolated and maybe spend more time
Mm-hmm.
focused on ourselves or that kind of thing. So yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
really good things to think about there. Do you yeah, as I keep thinking about as technology develops and new things come or we think about I mean, yeah, I don't know if it is so much the latest gadget that we have to think about as we get. It's still some of that, but there's also new types of social media and new types of programs, new types of games, all kinds of things coming out and being developed all the time. Do you have anything to say about how we need to be careful as we adopt these new things? Or yeah, maybe you don't have anything new to add, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm not quite sure how this fits in, but maybe one thing I would say regarding that is I think it's helpful to ask the question, does it exploit human nature in any way?
Hmm.
Um, does this technology or new thing or software or new social media, does that demand things from me? Or does that ask things from me, right? Like, a tool, like a hammer, um, you use it and you set it down and it stays where you put it and it doesn't ask you for anything until you need it again.
Yeah.
And cell phones used to be that way, but they're not anymore, where
Right.
suddenly I'm getting notifications, from all kinds of different things and it's asking me to do things, and it's connecting me back to work, and suddenly I have an email and I need to fix something, and like this tool is demanding my attention.
Hmm.
It's asking certain things from me, um, and there's a cost to that. And what's really interesting is that, um, especially social media. I'll pick on social media here, but it's not just that. But social media exploits human nature. You know, if
Right.
someone likes your post, that's like dopamine. I mean,
Yeah.
it, and it's all intentional, right? They
Yeah.
hire psychologists to help design this software to make it the most addictive possible, because the more time you spend in their software, the more money they make,
Right.
essentially, is what it comes down to. So it's not like they have evil intentions, it's just that they want to make the most money they can, and one way of doing that is by keeping your attention the longest.
Yeah.
So with any new kind of technology, I think it's really important us to be thinking about that. How is this technology going to demand or ask things of me? And am I willing to deal with that or give that to
Yeah.
this technology? Um, so, and
Yeah. It's
I think on the same time, this is part of that same thing. Is like, what are we gonna be losing out on? Um, so I might spend more time with this technology. Maybe that actually doesn't give me joy. Maybe it doesn't help me live more fully. Maybe I should say no to that technology and take up running or hiking, or, like, what are those things that really give you fulfillment and joy, and focusing on those, and kind of, you know, making sure the technology falls in behind that,
hmm
instead of just like, oh, here's this new cool thing and it's really attractive, and you try it and you kind of get, bogged down or stuck in it. Um, so,
Yeah. And I really like that because I mean it kind of brings up the concept of opportunity cost. So
mm-hmm,
when we get a new piece of technology um spend more time on social media or something like that, it's not it might be good in itself, but we have to think about, are we giving up other things
mm-hmm,
in order to do this, and
mm-hmm,
would there be something else that would be better? So yeah, I like that. That's great.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, just in before we end it off here, I like to see if you have any advice to share with us. So thinking about your experience and what you've um, been through and what you've learned, do you have any advice to share with someone that's interested in getting into IT or is maybe starting out in IT? And you thinking back over your experience, is there anything that you would say to them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think maybe the first thing I would say is just to tinker around with
hmm
um, technology, computers, if you're interested in IT, networks. Um, and a good way to do that is to also study for technical certifications. And if you're just starting out, the best one to do, in my opinion, is the CompTIA A plus exam, it's called.
Okay.
And you can find free study material online. You can pay for courses, but that will give you foundational knowledge of even how CPU clock cycles work, right? What's happening in the computer CPU, and it'll go over motherboards and RAM and hard drives and solid state drives and network cards and a whole host of things,
Well,
and even like general troubleshooting theory. How do you
hmm,
troubleshoot a computer? Those kind of things. And it's just a really, really good place to start. Even if you never take the exam. I never took the exam. I
okay.
should.
Is it an
But
online, something you can do online, or do you have to go somewhere to write it?
you have to go to a testing center
Oh, okay.
to take the
Yeah.
test. I think over COVID they let you take it online, so I don't know if they'll keep it that way or not. Um,
Yeah.
but they also have other tests or exams as well. They have one on networking. They have one on security. So like if you're interested in security, for example, that'd be a really good place to start.
Yeah. So you've benefited from doing some of the prep for the exam, even though you've never written it. Is that what you're saying, or taken the?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. That's
Um,
a.
I'm trying to remember what it's called here. I think it's called open source computer science.
Okay.
And what it is a guy um, made a list of like computer science courses and compiled them. And basically, what he did was here's a way you can get the equivalent of a bachelor's in computer science by taking these courses. And it's just the computer courses. So it's none of the general ed courses or anything like that.
Okay.
And it's all based on online. So it might
Wow.
be from MIT, it might be from Coursera, it might be, like he has all the links there. Some you have to pay for if you want to get official recognition that you completed the
Okay. Yeah.
course, others you don't, it's kind of just this, compiled list.
Well, that's neat.
Um, if you're fascinated by computer science and you're not necessarily interested in going to college, that would be a great way to at least learn a lot about computer science and get started in the field um, with, you know, practically no money. You would just need to spend time, 10,
Yeah.
20 hours a week probably to keep up with that kind of workload. But that could be really beneficial. Um, Even if you just wanted to, go down through that list and, pick out 3 courses that you're interested in. I think that'd be a great gateway into the IT field.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's great to know that there's resources out there like that. So, yeah, it's fantastic. Maybe thinking a little more generally now, do you have a couple pieces of advice for just anyone that uses technology and anyone that, um, yeah, wants to yeah, I'm just thinking generally here. Most people would have a computer or a cell phone, something like that. Do you have any general tips off the top of your head for someone to think about with general technology?
I think I would probably say something similar to what I already mentioned with trying to think about um, what brings you joy and fulfillment and some of
Mm-hmm.
those pieces. Um, think about those things and then try to figure out how does your smartphone, for example, fit into that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I did on my smartphone was I uninstalled all social media apps,
Hmm.
and that was pretty crazy in the sense suddenly my phone wasn't asking things of me near as
Hmm.
often.
Yeah.
And I use my smartphone differently now.
Hmm.
And so, like, doing something like that, you might not get rid of Facebook or Instagram, for example, but if you don't have it on your smartphone, in those 30-second, time windows where you have nothing to do, you're, commuting to work or you're riding in a car, you could just enjoy the moment and the person you're with or whatever. Maybe
Yeah.
you value that. I think you should value that. And kind of removing some of those go-to things on your smartphone, for example, is a really good way of pushing yourself in that direction.
Yeah.
Um, and so, kind of thinking about what you value and how you want your technology to support those values, and then try to align your technology, for that. So, it might be on your computer installing a extension in Google Chrome that doesn't allow you to access Facebook or YouTube for 30 minutes at a time. And that's when
Hmm.
you focus on the work you have and you just do that thing and you can't get to Facebook and you can't get to YouTube, so you're not distracted.
Yeah.
Little things like that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think sometimes we have to be willing to be radical. Maybe it
Yeah.
means get rid of your smartphone entirely, um, and your life might be better. I don't know. Like, we need to be willing to try something different if what we're using isn't working. Um, and sometimes that might be a hard, inconvenient thing, but probably in the end it'd be worth it. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I think it's important to think big picture, and try to make sure to use your technology in a way that supports your values and your goals, not just doing the easy thing. And that's one thing that's so frustrating about technology these days, is it makes everything so easy. And so it's just
Yeah.
what we do. We just do
Yeah.
the easy thing. That's who we are as humans. And there again, it's exploiting our human nature. Um, and so we need to be thinking about that. And here again, I'm putting a plug in for Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism.
Mhm.
It's a fantastic tool to help you think about those things. And in this book, if you want to do it, he basically asks you to do a 30-day technology fast,
Okay.
where basically you remove all the optional technology pieces from your life for 30 days. So anything that's required for work or essential, you keep. So like email, for example, for work, you would probably keep. But it
Right.
might mean, if it's okay, to remove it from your smartphone.
Yeah.
But getting rid of technology as much as possible and focusing on some of the other activities that bring you, fulfillment and joy. Maybe it's, hiking or running or pursuing a hobby like photography or something. Gives you more time to do that. And then after you go through this 30-day fast, you think about what you would add back in. Um, and so my wife and I did that, and that was really helpful. Um, and it helps you think about what you value and how you want technology to fit into that. Um, so yeah, I would definitely recommend the book.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, I like the things that you shared about that, and just, yeah, just thinking about how it's affecting us and what it's, yeah, pointing us to or causing us to do. So that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's about time to wrap it up here, but is there anything yet that you wanted to talk about or promote that you didn't get a chance to before we sign off?
I'm thinking about another book here, just as we've been talking.
Yeah.
It's called "You Are Not a Gadget"
Okay.
by Jaron Lanier, and I definitely don't support everything he says. He is not a Christian, as far as I know, but he's a philosopher, and
Okay.
he talked a lot about technology. It's the field he's been in. Like, people know him as the father of virtual reality, for example.
Okay.
Um, he has some really interesting things to say about technology and
Okay.
how much drastically technology changes us as people. And if you're interested in learning or reading more about that, that could be a good resource to read. He has some pretty fascinating things to say, and he's not just doom and gloom. Like, he
Okay.
can be an optimist. I'm optimistic about technology. I guess I should say that. It can be really
Hmm.
easy to bash it and be doom and gloom, and there definitely are things that are not helpful about it. Um, but it doesn't mean throw everything out. I think there are ways of using technology well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience with that you have in working with technology, and also, yeah, I really appreciated the thoughts and things that you shared from your reading and experience with us here towards the end. So, thanks so much for sharing, Carlin, and it was great to catch up with you a little bit again too.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Roland. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Carlin, for sharing your knowledge with us. I thought it was really quality advice that he gave of how we can take certain steps or certain measures to make sure that our phone or other devices or other types of technology are not asking too much of us. And I like the comparison that he gave that a type of technology, it really is, like a hammer, doesn't ask things of us like our smartphone maybe does. And so it's just wise for us to think about, first of all, that different types of technology are different and have different effects on us, and to think about what those effects are and how they're causing us to live our life, and just be really wise. I like what he said, that he doesn't want to throw it away and be doom and gloom when it comes to technology, but we do have to be really conscious and careful, I think is a good word of thinking about how our technology is affecting us. So thank you, Carlin, for giving me things to think about there, and for sharing with us. If you'd like to find out more about this episode or other episodes, check out the website, everydayexpertise.ca. And thank you to those of you that have given a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, or have sent me a message telling me something that you enjoyed about the show, or giving a suggestion of some kind. I love to hear from people and to hear what you have to say about the podcast. So please keep those coming. And yeah, that email, if you want to send me an email, is contact@everydayexpertise.ca. That's all for now. Join me again next week to learn from the expertise of everyday people.